last time I've said that when we come to the end of our resources, particularly internal but also external, we have to open ourselves to instructions from outside of ourselves. And when we are ready to humble ourselves in that way, then there's an opening for something else to meet us. And this is really scary work, but at the same time, it's the essence of true spiritual practice, to open to strategy we do not know yet, to go beyond what we know in the service of what we love. And working with the Buddha's teaching at this time in history, which is best characterized as a threshold moment between two worldviews, between two paradigms, the paradigm of materialism based on human supremacy and colonialism and all of the repercussions we are now facing in the poly crisis, and something else based on the appreciation of our complete embeddedness and full dependence on the web of life. And just for a short reality check, in terms of biomass on this planet, on living matter on this planet, humans only make up 0.01%. 0.01% of the total biomass. Plants make up about 82.5%. Fungi make up 2.20%. And animals, including humans, make up 0.36%. And I'm going to put a link into the chat for you to maybe, if you're interested, look that up later. It's quite amazing. Oh, what's happening here? Oh, so everyone in the meeting, okay. Okay, this is the link. You can check that out later. So while humanity's weight, in terms of biomass, seems truly insignificant, the marks, and the traces we leave since, a few hundred years on the world are not at all insignificant. So, such a very insignificant fact, if it's left unchecked, it can become extremely powerful and either detrimental or enhancing. And through our systems, based on fossil fuels, we have been able to bring in the sixth mass extinction, even we are only 0.01% of the biomass. That's really amazing, that this is possible. And, yesterday I been watching a few things on Democracy Now! About the COP30, the climate conference in Belém, Brazil. And I've learned there that this COP30, the 30th of those conferences, is the first one ever where fossil fuels were clearly mentioned as the true culprit behind the climate crisis. Before, there was always like a beating around the bush because there was so much pressure and power coming from different countries, in particular the US and also Arab states and other countries which didn't want that to be pointed out. And as you know, America doesn't have even any real official representatives at the conference. But what is a true progress is that this is for the first time really clearly mentioned, and also there's a lot of indigenous nation members at this COP because it's in Brazil and it's easier for them to show up. It's about, I've seen, like they say, about I've forgotten the number, I must say, but it's really impressive, and there's a lot going on, not only inside the buildings, but also outside on the streets. And just, looking at the perception of how they show up, the indigenous worldview is really the antithesis to the extractive materialist worldview. And in terms, of the Buddha's teaching, they are both empty. They are both empty of a self. And they are arising because of causes and conditions, and they are shapeable. And this simply means, that we do have a choice to change our own Western paradigm. And, slowly but surely over generations replace it with a different perceptual conditioning. One that is more sacred and inspired. This is simply like a matter of training and education. And a way of, recovering some of the ancient ways of viscerally knowing ourselves as part of a living, intelligent earth. So it's not like reinventing the wheel, but it's recovering, remembering by skillfully, working with perception, which is empty of a self and can be shaped. In the Buddha's training is all about shaping perception. In the Buddha's training, the main weight is on seeing impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self or emptiness. That's the central perceptual training, we are undergoing in the Buddha's teaching. It's the timeless core of the Buddha's teaching, which is liberating. But then there's also, the cultural background, which, comes to us from Iron Age India and patriarchy and, top-down systems of thinking, which have, been proliferating into, how lives are lived now in the Western world. But we have a choice, we can use the timeless liberating core as is, but then we can present it within a different framework, within a different background. And that background is to viscerally know ourselves as part of a living, intelligent earth. Because, by now we are all clear, and I think that's why we all show up here, that contemporary life is not nervous system friendly. And, our nervous systems are fried, our nervous systems are contracted, our nervous systems are under attack, by the current paradigm, which is constantly driving for more. And this very nervous system is the doorway for perception. So if the nervous system is fried, the perception shrinks. It's all about survival, So living in a shrunken, contracted perception cuts us off from reality, the way things truly are, which is dangerous, and has led us in the current human-induced sixth mass extinction. So once we understand, how that's all connected, then we also know, we need to find skillful means that bring us back to a bigger picture of who we are and where we live. And, this is what I try to experiment with here with these guided meditations. And now, we can just find a posture we can sustain about 40 minutes and use this time to train ourselves to begin living outside of human supremacy. anthropocentrism, the way of looking which comes from that assumption that this is all about us. As the first Europeans arrived here, they had the doctrine of discovery, a papal bull behind them. And the Pope said, whenever you come to a land where there is people who are not Christians, these are not real people, this is fauna, and you can just take it. That was called the doctrine of discovery, which is at the root of colonialism, and that colonialism is at the root of the climate crisis. So it's that assumption of human supremacy which has been supported, by the old way of looking, has been doing a lot of damage. And now we are waking up to it. Waking up to what's really at the root of it. And seeing, how contemporary life is not nervous system friendly and shrinks perception, because there's this constant worry, how to survive, how to pay the bills. Maybe not so much for us people here on this call, having the privilege to come on a call like that, but for many other people, especially in the global south. And about 8% of the global population hold 50% of the Earth's wealth. I mean, that's so crazy. 8% of the global population hold 50% of the Earth's wealth. Which brings in this constant worry of the many on how to survive, to pay the next bill, to get the next bite of food. And gives rise to so much violence. So, so just checking in with your body as you hear this, the withholding of abundance has an effect on our nervous system. And generosity helps the nervous system to relax. And first, we need to start with being generous with our own contraction, to be okay with that, to accept it. And, and learning to work with perception to support the returning to a bigger picture. To viscerally experience ourselves again as part of a living, intelligent earth. As our forebears have been living in that perception, and some of the indigenous people today still live in that perception. And what I saw at Democracy Now, there is quite some talking from indigenous people. They just don't want to have any contact. They don't want to have contact. They want to be left alone. Number one is, it brings them disease, which they are not, have no immune systems for. And it brings them just, it brings them just violence and all the rest of it. So there's, I've heard on this news, that Brazil is trying, to protect them from not being able, that they can have their territory without being necessarily woven into the consumer culture. But, there's a lot of criminal activity also going on, and it's very, very sad. So it's a real clash, now. It's becoming a real clash between those two worldviews. And it becomes more kind of public and obvious. And, we can choose what we want to support. Even, we're living here in the city, or, a small town. No, not really small, but a town, let's say. It doesn't really matter where we live. We can allow this different way of looking at ourselves and at our lives to find a place in ourselves. And as we are doing this, undigested material comes up, and that can be painful, but that's part of the process. For us to take in the fact what has happened. As the European people, were spreading out all over the globe, in a very naive understanding. And now we are falling out of that. And that's painful, but it can be done. And, we need to work with the nervous system, which is stressed. So these meditation instructions are there, to soothe the nervous system, to come down, from this contraction to a more open, way of being. By, perceiving ourselves and our lives in a different way. And I've recently, heard a teaching by Pat McCabe, who is a Diné ceremonial leader and international speaker. She's also called Woman Stand Shining. And she was saying, that all the waterways are the Earth's nervous system. And all of our ancestors, the dinosaurs and the pharaohs and all of our ancestors in deep time had a drink since time began from this water system, which is a closed system. And through this water system, the Earth monitors all of our children, how they are doing. And just, taking that in, that all beings who have lived on this planet since the planet formed, almost 5 billion years ago, have had a drink from that water system. Even, sometimes it gets deep underground and then it starts boiling and then it evaporates and then it comes down as rain or as snow and then it freezes, but it's always the same water. It holds a lot of information. And our bodies, are made of 75% or so of water, or maybe even more. Babies are made of more percentage of water than older people. So the sophistication, of this process we are part of, we really can't wrap our mind around it, but we can sense into it. We can invite it to inform us on a visceral level, which is one of the six senses. Or let's say, I think that's not correct, but it's more like a combination of several senses. And through relaxing, we can participate more fully and learn to have an access to this bigger picture. And grow out of these very small-minded systems, which are at this point in time, really based on fossil fuels and us phasing out, There's a great resistance, here of the American administration, but there's other countries, in particular, China is leading with solar energy. And if we are willing to let go of what we know and be with the not knowing, and which is scary, but that's the only way how something new can come through and find a place to land. That's how emergence works. When there is no space, then when there's contraction, then we just stay in the old ways. But not knowing is much more intimate, but can be uncomfortable and scary if we are used to constantly plan and attach, to knowing. Only by being in the not knowing, a space for something we do not know yet can be there. Of course, makes a lot of sense, I think. My first teacher, Ajahn Buddhadasa, was always saying, he was teaching us, and he was then already very old, and taught in the morning and about 5 a.m. when it was still cool in Thailand, 5 or 6 a.m. And he was saying, the teacup is still not full at that time, and he can put something in, whereas later in the day, the cup is already full and overflowing. And when the cup is still not full, then we can stand at that threshold and receive, from the web of life, new ways of responding. By, becoming rewired into a deeper consciousness that has the capacity to appreciate the fact that all living things are of one process. And we are not in control here. It was just an immature kind of an idea, of a worthy to a maybe teenager or a toddler or whatever. And we are, the human body or the human being is a somatic receptor site to receive that information through tuning into the aliveness, the charge, the vibrancy. We can sense in the energy body. And really learning to navigate it carefully. Do not squander that, but just doing some short-term gains, Not just focusing on more widths and breadths, more diverse input. But we also need to go deeper into this, not knowing, into that vibrancy, before it has emerged into form. That means, to honor that power is to sense it deeply before it emerges into form. So by just, dropping into the body and sensing the energy body, which is kept alive through eating, drinking, and breathing, knowing that 82% of the living matter, the biomass on this planet is plant life. That's what keeps us all going, because it's the plants which have the power to transform light into sugar, into food. And then we eat that food, we eat that light. And the byproduct of that process is oxygen. So that's really the basis of our being here. And it's not about us, fighting with all of this, but it's a more attuning and participating as members to enhance the process. And for now, our practice is just to allow all of that information to land in us, and as it lands in us, old stuff gets triggered, like old trauma gets triggered, and that's part of what needs to happen, the digestion of that, so that there's more relaxation, and if there's more relaxation, there's a bigger, is a capacity to access a bigger picture and find our place in that on a visceral level. And then, live from that place. Respond from that knowing. Rather than, from being afraid about how to pay the next whatever. This is maybe call it idealistic, but to use that inspiring way of looking as a medicine, as a means to open ourselves up into a bigger picture, to whatever degree we can. There's no way, that we need to force anything, because it can't be forced, but it's more like that's the direction to go now. As we are slowly maturing out of human supremacy, We can't do that overnight, of course, but we do what we can. And then, we join with like-minded people in these pockets of sanity all around the planet. And that's how healing works. These little pockets, they are the beginnings, of a new paradigm. First, they are just like few and far in between. But then over time, as we are tending to it, in the right way, they start to get stronger and they start to connect up like the mycelium. It's the worldwide net which can support us. We are sitting here together in Europe and America, able to connect in this way, and there's many groups who are doing similar work in different ways. And that's very encouraging, I think. Because this aliveness will always find a way. And it's like a sensing practice, a sensorial practice, which we can support through imagination. Imagining ourselves as part of a living, intelligent earth, imagining ourselves inside of earth. So imagine ourselves inside of earth and then sensing into this vibratory pulsation, the aliveness, the vibrancy of the energy body, which is a cell inside of a much vaster body, the body of planet Earth, which communicates, with other celestial bodies, the sun in particular, but the moon and the stars. And James Hillman, whom I quote often, who is a Jungian American psychologist, has already passed on, he said, to sense deeply we must imagine. And to imagine accurately, we must sense. So sensing into this vibratory pulsation of consciousness or awareness, or emptiness, or however you want to call it, or God, or Dhamma. And allowing that vibration, that pulsation to consciously move through us and rewire us, change us from the ground up, like from the viscerally, physically, the neural pathways in the body, which are also under colonial influence, of course, through our education and upbringing. But intentionally open ourselves to be rewired by having recognized the harm and the smallness. And intentionally, choosing to grow out of it. And intention is really paramount here. It directs. It directs the process. And in that way we can practice the full Noble Eightfold Path, right view and right intention or right thinking. And then very important, right action, right speech, right livelihood. How we show up. And then right mindfulness and right concentration or right focus. So it's a whole life practice, not just sitting on the cushion, but it's also how do we integrate that? How do we show up? As we are coming now into a time, where more and more things are falling apart, and making space for something we don't know yet. Like an emergent update, which is, coming in to our bodies through our communication with the vaster body of the planet, which communicates with the other celestial bodies in the cosmos. So it's just like so far beyond human control. And if we look back, we can say it really started before COVID. COVID showed us the way we are really not in control. And since, COVID has been integrated by the planetary system, now we are maybe sufficiently porous, to receive more updates. And, strengthened by the Buddha's teaching, we can open to that. And, as we are participating in this way, then one day even, fully step out of that need of embodiment, if that is what we would like to do. To leave that cycle of birth and death behind. But for now, as long as we are here, we can participate in a way which brings healing for ourselves and for everything we love. By simply, being willing and able to viscerally experience ourselves as part of a living, intelligent earth, which always knows what to do since a very long time, has been protecting life. And there's no reason to assume it's going to stop now, because the American administration denies a lot of things it doesn't want to know about. It's a tragic and deeply embarrassing truth, but it's not gonna stop aliveness from being alive. Just creating more suffering, which is scary enough. So opening to that aliveness, that vitality, that vibrancy, and opening ourselves to be part of the immune system of the planet. Joining in with all of the good people who have shown up in Belém to make it known. And at the same time, not wanting to polarize, wanting to keep people to come to the table and communicate. However difficult it might be. But that's really important too. Because at one point everyone will wake up to it. Because it's just like a no-brainer, really. If your brain, has enough capacity and is not so contracted that you are just completely lost in repetition compulsion of trauma. So, noticing the good fortune we have that we can share in this way, and being, the gratitude which comes with that recognition. However frustrating it might be. So sensing into the aliveness, the vibrancy, and consciously opening to that. In attuning and inviting a rewiring on this very deep level, which makes place for a new level of consciousness to land in us, which knows viscerally about our deep embeddedness in the web of life. And whenever the mind wanders off into thinking, just letting go of that thinking and coming back to viscerally sense the aliveness in the energy body. As an offering to ourselves and as an offering to what we love and as an offering to this beautiful planet. An acknowledging of the abundance, which is this planet is abundance. abundance in action, really. So really reframing perception. By stepping out of human supremacy consciously through training ourselves to do so. It's just not gonna happen by itself. We need to work with that consciously. And as we are doing this, a lot of past trauma in terms of racism, slavery, hierarchies, patriarchy, all of that comes up for digestion. Colonialism. So it's not going to be like a quick fix, but it is a practice. That the contraction slowly being released through awareness and kindness. This is how immaturity shows up. This is just a law of nature. It's not a personal failing. But as soon as we, get even a little understanding of it, it's our practice to relate to it. And it's our path to liberation. To turn away from it takes more energy than to face it. At least on the long run. So to quote James Hillman one more time, to sense deeply we must imagine, and to imagine accurately we must sense.